Now let's look at some common inductive arguments. And an inductive argument is one that makes a claim that the premises infer a probably true conclusion. So premises infer a conclusion that has a plus 50% chance of being true. So there can be a good inductive argument that turns out to have a false conclusion. And we know that that's not true of a deductive argument. If it has a good form and all true premises, the conclusion can't be false. But with an inductive argument, the premises should infer a probably true conclusion, and that, of course, doesn't mean that the conclusion will end up being true. But we would be surprised if it ended up being false. So one very common kind of inductive argument that we all have a lot of experience with is a prediction. And that's taking past information and then inferring something about the future. And of course, this is a kind of inductive argument because the future hasn't happened yet. And there can sometimes the patterns that we're used to seeing don't come out to, reflect each other. So sometimes we can have an abundance of experience and evidence from the past, predict something about the future. It's a very good, strong argument. And it turns out there's a kind of once in a 1,000-year event that makes it false. One career that is deeply invested in making predictions is meteorology, weather predictions. And you just take all the past weather information and the way that weather has acted in the past, and then you take that information and you infer something about the next day, the next 5 days, the next 10 days, depending on the kind of forecast you're making. And, we all know that meteorologists often get the weather wrong. Do we think that they aren't using good logic and reasoning? No, they might be. You can, of course, make weak predictions. But presumably a good professional meteorologist who has talent is going to make a reasonable, draw a reasonable conclusion based on an abundance of evidence about the future. And nevertheless, they might get it wrong sometimes. But we would be surprised. That's the key. So the one interesting thing about deductive arguments is adding more premises doesn't strengthen the conclusion at all. The deductive arguments, premises, have all the information that we need to derive the conclusion. So adding an additional premise is not going to help us. With the modus ponens argument form that we just looked at, adding a third premise does nothing to make the argument better. Okay? But with inductive arguments, the more evidence you can provide in support of the conclusion, the stronger the argument is. So when it comes to a prediction, if we had a premise like the last 10 days were sunny, and then our conclusion is tomorrow will be sunny. Okay, that's a pretty good argument. It has 10 days of evidence stacked up. I imagine in addition to this, we'd have to say that there's no notable changes that we anticipate based on what we're seeing right now and so on. But 10 days of a consistent weather pattern is strong evidence for that being the case the next day. But this would make it even stronger, is if we add another premise and we say the 10 days before that were sunny. Well, now we are drawing from 20 days of evidence, 20 days of our experience over the last 20 days. And so this would be an argument that is stronger than the first one. So this is just to show that with inductive arguments, adding more evidence, adding more premises does strengthen the argument because it makes the conclusion even more likely to be true. All right. And that's just not the case with deductive arguments. So an important difference between the two. But anytime you see a claim that takes evidence from the past and then infers something that is not accounted for in the evidence from the past, this just tells us all that these premises tell us is about the last 10 days and the 10 days before that. It does not tell us at all about tomorrow. Okay. So when the evidence just speaks to the past and the conclusion is about the future, then the conclusion's truth is not baked into those premises, but the premises do make the conclusion likely to be true. And the more evidence that can be brought to the table, the stronger the argument is. And of course, an argument can be rather weak if there's not enough evidence. If instead of, if we didn't have premise 2 here, and all we were basing this conclusion on was one day, the last one day was sunny. Well, now we have much less evidence supporting the conclusion, and I'm not sure I would want to be convinced by this argument. I would consider it a weak argument for lacking enough evidence to say that this conclusion has an over 50% chance of being true, even while it might indeed turn out to be true.